Okay, today I'm going to be talking about what is probably one of the most confusing subjects for anybody learning the French language, and that is the French subjunctive. Today, in this basic overview, I'm going to be going over what it is, how you form it, when you use it, and then the irregular conjugations that come with any verb tense or verb mood. First off, what is it? The subjunctive is a verbal mood which is used to express actions or ideas which are subjective or otherwise uncertain. They express will or wanting, emotion, doubt, possibility, necessity, or judgment. How do you form the subjunctive? Unlike using the subjunctive, forming the subjunctive is relatively simple. What you do is you take the third person plural form, the ill plural, ILS or ELLES form of the present tense, the indicative form, and then you drop the ENT from the ending. So if you take parler, for example, you have il parle, with parle being spelled PARLENT. You're going to go ahead and drop the ENT from the end, which will leave you with the stem of PARL. And the subjunctive endings, no matter if it's ER, IR, RE, and for the most part, regular or irregular verbs, are je takes E, tu is ES, on will take E, nous is IONS, vous is IEZ, and then il in the plural is ENT. And again, if you look at parler here, the je, tu, il, and the il in the plural form are all the same in the subjunctive as they are in the indicative, which is one of the saving graces for ER verbs, some of the other verbs, is that a lot of times deciding whether or not to use the indicative or the subjunctive, for those of you that don't know, the indicative is just the basic standard present tense, the je mange, tu manges, il mange, nous mangions, vous mangez, il mange, etc., etc. Excuse me. And the je, tu, il, and the il plural form of the subjunctive will be the exact same. So if you accidentally use the subjunctive instead of the indicative, or the indicative over the subjunctive, it will not be immediately obvious, but as we go further and further along, we will see where it can become obvious. And this slide here is one of the things where it will make it more obvious, depending on what person you're using and whatnot, is that the subjunctive form is nearly always found in a dependent clause, which is introduced by que or qui, and the subjects of the dependent and independent clauses are usually different. If you take the example phrase here, je veux que tu le fasses, je veux is the independent clause, and tu le fasses is the dependent clause. I know it says here that the dependent clause cannot stand alone as a sentence, but I mean, technically, it could, but it makes a lot more sense when you have it with the je veux. And the que or qui, a lot of times it will more likely be que than qui, is a dead giveaway that, oh, I need to use the The subjunctive is used to express will, orders, advice, and desires. And be careful when I say orders here, because it's not like the command form. It's not like a direct order, a direct command. It's more soft order or a suggestion, if you will. If you want to pause the video to write down the examples I have here, feel free to do that at any point in the video. I might go a little bit fast or not talk about some of the examples because they just follow the same patterns as the ones before and the ones after them. I'll normally only point something out if it's especially important. Like in this slide here, the reason I have il faut que highlighted is because that is one of the phrases that takes the subjunctive that you have to memorize because it comes up so often in literature and in all sorts of things. When I lived in France, it was one of the phrases that I would hear all the time. I would read it, I would hear it on the TV, on the radio, on the streets. You won't necessarily hear subjunctive a lot, but there's certain phrases where there's no getting away from, and you will hear the subjunctive with it. The il faut que is one of those phrases. And going on to the next slide here, the subjunctive is used with emotions and feelings. It's used to express things like adorer que, or aimer que, or détester que. It's kind of like using... It's basically just that it's how you express it in French, and you just gotta learn to identify phrases that use emotions, feelings, that, oh, that must be subjunctive. It's just one of those things you gotta keep on memorizing, just keep on learning. And another use of the subjunctive is to express opinion, possibility, and doubt. And there are several important phrases on here, or I guess they're more or less categories rather than phrases. But the main thing about the subjunctive is that it doesn't... There's sort of an ambiguity to the phrases that it is used with generally. If the phrase is a certitude, like il est certain que, even though it has the que, il est certain, it's a certitude, you will use the indicative rather than the subjunctive. But if you... Je doute que, I doubt that, when it's in this form, it will be the subjunctive. But if you put it into the negative, je ne doute que, or je ne doute pas que, I always forget the pas sometimes, always sometimes, but you need to use the indicative rather than the subjunctive, because the ne doutez pas is considered a certitude grammatically in French. And then these phrases that I have highlighted in green here, the il n'est pas certain que, il n'est pas clair que, il n'est pas vrai que, when they are in this negative form, they will take the subjunctive. Il n'est pas certain que je pars. It is not certain that I will leave. But if you put them into the affirmative, il est certain que, you will use the indicative. Il est certain que je pars, which is probably a bad example because it's, again, one of those where the indicative and subjunctive is spelt the same and pronounced the same. But if you would use the vous or the new form, which are usually pronounced differently and spelt differently, then you have to pay attention that, oh, this phrase is negative, it's uncertitude, or this phrase is affirmative, it's certitude, and just know negative uncertitude, subjunctive, positive certitude, indicative. And il semble que is one of those weird phrases where if you put, for lack of a better term, I'm going to call them qualifiers or quantifiers, like il me semble que, or il te semble que. It seems to me, or it seems to you. If you put that word in there, then it will be in the indicative. But if it's just il semble que, without one of those words, it will be the subjunctive. And then this list of phrases here, they use the subjunctive when they are in the negative or the interrogative form. Interrogative is just the fancy way of saying if you're using it to ask a question, it's interrogative or interrogative. However you want to pronounce it, be my guest. This is a French lesson, not English, so c'est que, or dire que, espérer que, il est certain que, penser que. If any of these are in the negative, you will use the subjunctive. If you're using them to ask a question, you will use the subjunctive. I'll give you a little bit of time here to pause the video if you want to, like I said, write down any of the examples. This is sort of what I went back over on the previous slide, the ones that I had highlighted in green and the one that I had in red a little bit too. This is just expanding more, giving more examples. This is sort of why the subjunctive can be confusing, because it has all these, it's not clear cut, it's not like the indicative where I am in the present, I am just using a normal sentence. I will speak in the indicative. You have to use the subjunctive if it meets these certain circumstances. And as you can see, a lot of these have que at the end. Actually, I think all of these on this slide end in que. And like I mentioned earlier, que, and to the lesser extent, qui, is your one giveaway that you will need to use the subjunctive, more or less. Again, you need to learn the rules about when or not to use the subjunctive, but if you see que after in a certain phrase, then your mind should start to get turning, oh, I might have to use a subjunctive. There's a que, there's a qui, subjunctive. Does it meet? Is it negative? Is it certain? Is it uncertain? Is it asking a question? If it follows and meets the guidelines that we've talked about, then you will use the subjunctive. If it doesn't, you will just use the plain old indicative. Okay, and these conjunctive phrases that I have here on the left, besides the ones on the bottom there, I guess they got a little bit messed up when I converted from PowerPoint to Keynote on my Mac, but that's my problem, not yours. The conjunctive phrases that use subjunctive are here. Again, note the que. À condition que, à supposer que, afin que, bien que. And then the ones at the bottom there and on the right do not take the subjunctive. Ainsi que, alors que, après que, depuis que, dès que. And one thing, this is a rare case of where knowing what things translate to as in English will help you with the French, because if you see the ones on the left, on the top left here, have that uncertitude to them, provided that this happens, or whatever, or so that. But the ones on the bottom and on the right, as soon as, since, well, since, when, whereas, once, they are certain, they pinpoint a direct time, they will use the indicative. Okay, now we get to the fun stuff, the irregular verbs and the subjunctive. And now these are the irregular verbs that have stem changes. There are some other ones that are not on this slide here on this chart. They're just ones that you'll have to learn, but for the most part, they will follow these examples. Speaking of following examples, just note that even though these are all irregular, that all of the stem endings are the exact same. The only thing that's different is that the nu and vu form of these verbs, you find their stem differently than before. All of the je, tu, il, and the il, el in the plural form are the exact same as before. You take the il, el plural form of the indicative and you lose the ent. But with these, the nu and vu form, you do the exact same thing, except you use the nu form. So up here you see for boire, for these four, it's boive, but here it's bouvons. So you lose the ons, and it leaves you with buv. Then you have bouvion and bouvier, and then it's the same thing for verbs like envoyer, prendre, venir. You just follow the same example, and just remember that the endings are all the same. It's the only a stem change that's different between them. And now here are some more irregular verbs that you more or less just have to memorize. Faire, pouvoir, and savoir all only have one stem, and it's only the stem that is irregular. All the endings follow the exact same subjunctive pattern as before. Aller and vouloir are kind of like the examples we just looked at, where they have different stems for the nu and vu form. But again, all of the endings are the exact same. So once you get the stem down, and this is one of those things where you more or less have to memorize it, you will have at least, 50% of it down if you want to count the ending as 50% and the stem as 50%. And just a quick note, if anybody has taken Latin, that is where a lot of these irregular stems come from. So that might help you there to recognize the subjunctive. If not, don't worry about it. There's a lot of other ways that you can memorize it. And The ones for faire, pouvoir, and savoir, aller vouloir, they're all irregular, but you will see them quite a bit. They're irregular, but they're common. And now going over to the verbs that are always different from everything, avoir and et. They, again, have two different stems, and they have different endings. The je, tu, il, and the il, el plural for avoir, their stem is ai, and all of them, except for the il, el, follow the exact same guidelines for how you conjugate it as far as the endings go. And then the il, el, on, instead of an e, it's a t. And for the nu and vu, the stem is ay, and the only difference for the ending is that instead of ions and iez, you just have ons and ez. The main reason for that is because if you had an I in there, the Y and the I make more or less a sound that's the same or relatively close to the same. So it would be like making the same vowel sound right next to each other, and it sounds really choppy and it's really difficult to pronounce. It doesn't flow very well. And so that's one of the reasons why those are like that. Moving on to et. I'm sure you've seen these before, the soi, soyon, soyer, soi. Again, just like the avoir, the et forms for the je, tu, il, vous, and il, el plural have the same stem, and the nu and vous have the same stem, except the endings are different from the normal one. The only one that is the exact same was the il, el plural with the ent. The je and tu form is s at the end of the stem, and the il, el, like avoir, it has a t at the end. And the nu and vous form, like avoir, has ons and ez instead of the ions and iez. This is all I was planning on covering in this presentation here. It's important to know that I did not cover everything here on screen or in the video description. I will be putting links to where I got the charts, because if anybody knows my computer talents, I obviously did not make these charts, and I want to make sure that I give credit where credit is due. All of these I got from French.about.com. I'll put the link there. That is a very good place for getting not just charts, but like explanations of why this happened, things are like they are. They'll just give you a lot of examples, and so on and so forth. They're a very good website, a very accurate one too. I think I've only ever found one circumstance where they weren't wrong about something. It was just a typo. They had in something, they forgot to put an S at the end of a verb in the tu form, so it's like typo. They're extremely reliable, and the site is curated by French teachers, French speakers, and people that you can trust, basically. This is not a paid endorsement by them. I don't think they do paid endorsements. But like I said, I just took these charts and that from them, and I want to make sure that they get their credit where it's due, because they do a very good job with things like these. And on another hand, note, I want to make sure that I point out that there is also a past subjunctive, which I did not cover today because it's something completely different and it would be way too much of an overload for everybody, myself included. There's links to that in the about their French subjunctive page, and there'll be links to that on the pages that I'll link you to. You won't see it as often as the regular subjunctive, just like everything else, but it pays to know that it exists. And if you're having trouble just with the regular subjunctive, don't worry yourself about going on and learning the past subjunctive. Just get to where you can understand the basic subjunctive. For me, it took me a long time to understand the subjunctive. Like, it's one of those things where I was taught, and until I lived in France, it just did not click with me. But when I was taught by actual French teachers and I lived the language, I lived amongst the people, it just clicked. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment below, send me a message here on YouTube. I'll be glad to answer everything I can or point you in the right direction. I did this more or less, well, to help myself review the subjunctive and to help others that were having the same problem I was. And hopefully this helped you, and if not, hopefully the things that I will link to in the description of the video will help you. If I remember, I'll throw a card up on the screen linking to where I got the charts and all that. Like I said, it's a very good website. Another good place to look is if you have a French to English or English to French, depending on however they label it, dictionary. A lot of times they will have a section in there dedicated to verbs, grammar, and all that. And obviously, if you have a bigger dictionary, like I have a Roberts Collegiate French Dictionary, which has a bigger, more thorough explanation than my Webster's Pocket French Dictionary. Although my Webster's one does have a surprisingly good section on there. If I remember, I'll put links to those on Amazon and in the video description too, because they're both very good dictionaries. The Roberts is one that I have sitting on my desk, just there if I need it when I'm writing and I'm not using my computer, so I can't go on there to look up. I will also link to a very good website, can't remember if it's .org or .com, but it has English, French, Spanish, I think it has Italian, Portuguese, all different kinds of guys on there, and it is very good. And if there's not a word in their main section, they have their own forums where like people will discuss idiomatic phrases and whatnot. And like if you have an idiomatic phrase in English, like the cat's got your tongue or something like that, if you post something about that in the forum saying what is the closest equivalent of this in French, Spanish, Italian, what have you, somebody will be more than happy to help you there. I would use it, if you're doing something like that, I would use it with a little bit of caution because it's the internet, people can make things up. But if you're using just like the online dictionary, or I won't call it a translator because it's basically a virtual dictionary. Basically everything they have there, at least on the French side, is checked against the Collins French Dictionary, which is another extremely good French dictionary. I have one of their pocket dictionaries, but that one's French only dictionary. Actually, I don't know where that is. I'll have to find it. But I'll put as many good websites as I know into the description of the video just to help, basically just help out. I'm just doing these videos to help me ingrain things and somebody else learn something. Perfect. Makes what I do all the more worthwhile. Till next time, see you later.